right, thanks everybody for having us. I guess I should start out by saying that I'm not Julie, as far as I know. Neither is John or Rick. Julie Crick is with MSU Extension, and she actually put together a really nice presentation on this program that is just getting rolled out called Eyes on the Forest. And this program is an opportunity for you as citizens to basically register trees on your own land and monitor their health. Now, there are 3 focal invasive species that we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail, but you can actually register any tree and track it for anything. And the idea is to get more people with their eyes on the forest as these new pests and diseases come into the state. So just a little bit of background. This was sort of already mentioned by Carolyn when she gave her presentation, but why are we doing something like this? There are a lot of costs associated with having invasive species come in, particularly with our forest resources. We have tree health concerns that can affect monetary value of trees, their value as habitat, their value for aesthetics. We have overall forest health issues, which, as an example, something comes and rips through a forest, takes out a couple species that are a dominant part of that forest. You have a lot of trees that are dying quite quickly and falling down. You might lose the forest ecosystem in general, which gets to the next point, ecosystem health. You lose a lot of woods like that very suddenly. That kind of has a cascading effects on a lot of things that depend on that forest, such as insects, birds, small mammals, larger mammals. And then, of course, human health. One good example is when you lose some of these riparian areas that are doing a lot for quality control of your water coming into your rivers or even your groundwater. So riparian forests are actually doing a lot for water quality. And of course, economic impact. So you lose trees, if they're valuable, if they're marketable, you're losing money. So this came about as a collaboration between MSU, Department of Entomology, Michigan State University Extension, and then of course MISSIM, which Vicki just talked about. And it's funded by the Michigan Invasive Species Grant Program. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to either Rick or John, and they're going to get into some of the focal species that are part of this program. And then we're going to come back at the end and talk about how exactly you register a tree if you're interested in doing so, and then options for future training.
All right, so the 3 key species that we're looking for with this Eyes on the Forest program are ones that we either haven't found in Michigan yet or have been pretty limited where they have been found. We have Asian longhorn beetle, the hemlock woolly adelgid, and 1,000 cankers disease of walnuts. And we'll just talk a little bit about each of those, kind of what they look like, what they do, why they're a concern. Asian longhorn beetle probably arrived in packaging material from Asia, China, Japan, Korea. And that's it's a fairly large insect with, well, I can flip forward to the pictures. I'll start with that. They attack a lot of species of hardwoods, and most especially maples, and that's what's really concerning here in Michigan, where maple is such a large part of the forest products industry. And it also attacks other species, birch, ash, which are mostly dead anyway, and a handful of others. Oh, there they are. Yeah, sycamore, buckeye, horse chestnut. Okay, so it's a fairly large insect, and it has antennas that are more than the length of its own body. And it has white spots throughout. There are similar looking beetles, the pine sawyer beetle in particular that lives in this area. It's a native beetle, and we get a lot of reports of those, which are quite similar looking, but as of right now, Asian longhorn beetle hasn't been found in Michigan. It has been found in, I think it was originally detected in Jersey City. I'm not sure where the original infestation was, but Jersey City, Chicago. The Chicago one was mostly eradicated. The nearest infestation right now is in Cincinnati, Ohio, and that's still an active infestation. These are maples in the pictures here. The key signs that you want to look for with Asian longhorn beetle are they leave these very distinctive, large exit holes, which are as big around as a pencil. It's probably but perfectly round exit holes, and they're almost exactly the diameter of a pencil, and they go straight into the tree for quite some distance. And that's where the adult insect emerges from the tree after feeding as a larva inside the wood for a year. This top picture here is showing it's called an oviposition pit, an egg pit. The female insect will chew that out, just a shallow pit on the surface of the bark, and then they'll lay one egg in each of these pits, and they make up to 90 of these in a season, one female insect on the tree. And each of those hatches and the larvae boards into the tree and tunnels throughout the wood. Which leads to this. This is called frass. It's a kind of a sawdust-like material pushed out from the galleries in the trees by the larvae. And this is one of the key signs that a lot of people pick up on first when they start to notice things wrong. They'll find the sawdust on the ground or perched up on the branches of the tree. And then, of course, finding the beetle itself, it's hard to miss, like a lot of.
Is that like an inch? How big is that beetle?
Yeah, about an inch to an inch and a half, quite large, and then very distinctive antennae, which are white and black striped. The next pest I'll talk about is Hemlock woolly adelgid. Of the three, Asian longhorn beetle, Hemlock woolly adelgid cankers. This is the only one that's been found in Michigan today, all around the Lake Michigan shoreline south of Muskegon in Ottawa County and surrounding there. Probably came in on infested nursery stock, hemlock seedlings. It's an insect pest which secretes a woolly, waxy looking substance at the base of needles. That they secrete this as protection as they're feeding on sap. And the insect itself is extremely tiny. It's the woolly secretion that is most noticeable. That's how most people pick up on it. It starts from the base of the tree, the lower branches, and typically works its way to the crown from there. And over time, as they feed on the sap, it weakens, kills branches, and eventually can kill the tree. So this is what it looks like, those woolly cottony masses at the base of the needles. There's there's a similar looking thing that
There's a scale that looks like it's not restricted to the base of the needles. It's still a
right, whereas this one is a similar looking scale insect can cover the entirety of the needle, where this one is restricted just to the base of the needle where it feeds. And most people will notice this, or they'll notice in its advanced stages as the insect has been there for a long time, it starts to appear pale green, gray, and declines. And this is found throughout the eastern United States, all throughout the Appalachian Mountains, where it's pretty well devastated the hemlock resource. And the last one, 1,000 cankers disease. This one affects walnut. It's found in the western United States right now, where the twig beetle comes from. And this is an interaction between two species: a twig beetle, which is a tiny twig-boring beetle, and a fungus, which was recently identified. And the twig beetle bores into the twigs, and it's these holes that allow the fungus to enter the tree. Like a lot of fungal disease, it's quite similar to oak wilt and Dutch elm disease, in that it starts usually out in the crown and the upper branches of the tree and works its way down as the fungus progresses. affects all species of walnuts, and you see that wilting pattern from the upper crown down as the tree is slowly filled by the fungus. And then, I wish there were pictures of this, but the cankers form underneath the bark, and it's quite pronounced. But that's something that you need to peel back the bark to look at. Yeah.
Is there a way to treat that?
Hmm?
Is there a way to treat that disease?
No, there isn't on this side, but detecting it and destroying the tree where it is found might help to slow that down or stop it. And it hasn't been found in Michigan yet. Okay, I believe that's all from me. We'll talk about the
Thanks, John. So one of the goals of the project is to establish this network of these sentinel trees. And in order to do that, we're going to be recruiting interested individuals that are willing to adopt a tree, and the species that will have the highest priority will be maple, hemlock, and black walnut. Now, we probably, if somebody doesn't have access to one of those species but still wants to participate, we're going to be very willing to encourage you to continue to participate. We don't know what we're going to find out there. That's part of the introductory of these new monitoring systems. It's all going to have some valuable data that we can use. So if, as I go through some of the criteria of the potential volunteers that we're looking for, even if you don't have access to these priority trees, don't be discouraged by that. Certainly let us know in our respective areas, and we'll do what we can to get you involved. So it is the tree pests that John went over that we're primarily looking for. But again, we may find something else, and it'll all be good in that regard to know what we find. So the ideal volunteer candidates would be somebody that have access to one of those 3 tree species, have a working knowledge of tree identification, preferably a background in natural resources management, or at least an interest in natural resource management, some basic computer skills, and Josh will go over that in greater detail in the final segment as to the depth of what we're looking for your computer skills. And then we're asking you to have the willingness to make at least a 3 to maybe even a 5-year commitment to the project, maybe even longer. This search and monitoring for invasives is going to be a part of our life, I believe, from here forward. So if this gets going, like I think it will, it could be something that will be a part of the ongoing monitoring from here on. So volunteers will be trained through us, likely through the Forestry Assistance Program. We have not received that training ourselves yet. We're kind of learning as we go here, but we will likely locally help any citizens that want to get involved with all aspects of the program. And so what you'll be asked to do is to collect certain data. Again, Josh will go over that in a little more detail. Enter into the data online and inspect the trees 2 to 3 times per year is what's going to be recommended at this time, and then to report the condition of the tree. We'll have a list of criteria as to what you're certainly going to be looking for. So, I use the emerald ash borer as probably the one forest invasive that probably everybody in the room has heard of, had some experience with. And what the emerald ash borer taught us, or reminded us of, is that a lot of times it's not the natural resource professionals that are out on the landscape that are making these discoveries. In fact, with emerald ash borer, a lot of general public had a very significant role in tracking and monitoring the movement of emerald ash borer beyond that core area down in the southeast when it first came onto the scene back in the early 2000s. And so more times than not, what we're looking for is to encourage, again with the title of the program, more eyes on the forest. Every one of us in the room, whether we own private lands or just use the natural resources in Michigan. If you see something unusual, we want to, establish this means of where to report it and what to report, and then the resource professionals will take it from there. And, the early detection and rapid response, those are the cornerstones of any missing program. Well, they're also the cornerstones of the Eyes on the Forest. I'm not going to go into, just in the interest of time, a lot of the benefits of the early detection. Again, I'll use emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer is costing us hundreds of millions across the nation, and we're not done with it yet. And those costs are associated with not only monitoring it, but tree removal, tree replacement. Some of you maybe even have experienced it firsthand in your own, where you live, whether it's an urban area or in a forested setting, maybe in your backyard. But just using it as an example, the impact that it has had on the landscape, and certainly as we talk about these big three, we don't want them to follow that same course of action. So if we can, again, early detection, early response, we're going to have better chances of controlling the situation. The benefits over the time, we're going to be collecting a lot of data. So that data will be very valuable, and not only to, just the general data, but to compare the changes over a period of time. So again, that's where the 3 to 5 year commitment, and maybe longer, is going to be valuable. And so that will be a part of the process. Problem with using somebody else's PowerPoint, you don't always know exactly what their thoughts were in terms of what they were sharing. But again, I can't overemphasize having more people looking for anything that may look unusual. And the more that you know about what we're encouraging you to look for, then the more likely we are going to find that early detection and have that opportunity for fast responses. So what can you do? Probably any one of us in the room may have an interest in participating in the program. Certainly we want, what I want to say is one of the other goals of the program is partnering. And we haven't always, and I can say this because I've been part of the Forestry Assistance Program for 28 years, we haven't always been the best partners out there with all the other agencies. And we're in the age of partnering. And it's going to be critical that we all pull in the same direction as we fight this monster uphill battle with invasives, not just forest invasives, but all the other invasives that are part of the picture now. So the other part is the partnering of every one of us in dealing with these invasives. So if you know of anybody that would be interested in participating, of course we would want to know that, depending on what county you're a part of. Certainly you can contact John, Josh, or I. We're the 3 foresters that cover those 6 counties, 5 or 6 counties, and so we would be the initial contact to set things in motion with where you go with the project. And the last thing I'll say is that we've reached a point where I think probably the more critical thing is we've got to encourage the minority, that's the majority of the forest ownership in Michigan, which is the private sector, to take a more active role in recognizing the impact that these invasives have. And if we're successful there, of course, we're going to, I guess, again, detect these sort of things in a much earlier stance so that we have more opportunity for response. And I think that's the last one, and I'm going to turn it back over to Josh. Maples, black walnut, or hemlock?
Is that only going to be those 3, or is the intent to add other species into that?
Yeah, this time those will be the priority species. But anybody that wants to participate, if you don't have one of those 3, I'm not going to turn you away. I still want you to
So if I
sign
want
up.
to monitor a chestnut?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. Because there's a lot of value. The whole thing with monitoring is, I am hoping that we get a negative detection.
Right.
That would be the
That's
goal
the best
here.
news, right.
So yes, any
Okay.
species would be, we would sign that.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about how you register a tree. So let's say you're interested. Rick sold you on this, which I hope he did. Now, how do you actually get a tree on there, and what kind of measurements should you be taking, and what should you be looking for? Step one is actually just going to the General Misson website, which Vicki already went over, and then create a username, create a password, get yourself in the system. Once you're on there, that red circle is around a phrase, it's called citizen science, okay? If you scroll over citizen science, it'll drop down and there's gonna be a part that's called Eyes on the Forest. So you've got an account, you go to citizen science, you go to Eyes on the Forest. And just FYI, we have handouts on the tables over here. It's got pest alerts regarding thousand cankers disease, hemlock woolly adelgid, Asian longhorn beetle, also one on oak wilt, which we didn't get to talk about today, but a really important one in this area. There's also a stack of handouts on directions for exactly how to do this that I'm talking about right now. And then there's just a general pamphlet on Eyes on the Forest. So click on Eyes on the Forest under Citizen Science. And then you're going to get to this screen, okay? If you have not registered a tree before, you basically want to go to print field data form. There's a reason for that, because before you register a tree on here, it's actually important to collect certain information about that tree you're trying to register. This is the path of least resistance, if you will. There's things you want to look at that tree before you even get on the computer and start entering it. And there's an example of that field data form sitting on this table as well. Now, I'll show you one. So this is the form. Now, some of this you don't necessarily need to fill out ahead of time, like latitude, longitude, for instance. You'll have the option when you go on to the Eyes on the Forest component of Misson to click a point on the map. And it'll autofill the latitude and longitude, just as if you were recording an invasive species. But there are other things that you want to collect ahead of time on this field data sheet that will make it easier to register a tree. As an example, DBH. Okay, what is DBH? This is the kind of thing that we would cover in future training, a more in-depth training. DBH is diameter at breast height, the diameter of your tree 4.5 feet up on the tree. Okay, it's a sort of an arbitrary height where diameters are taken, but it's a way to stay consistent across all trees. So basically, how big is that tree in diameter? Is the tree on public land? Is it on private land? Is it in a forested area, a natural area? Is it a landscape tree in a park? You get the idea. You look at all these different things. Is it dominant in the canopy? Is it in the mid-canopy? I'll scroll down to show you a few more. This is all stuff you can look at ahead of time before you ever go on the computer. Stuff like canopy condition. 1 is really good, a really healthy looking crown. 5 is really bad, a really small crown. Is there soil disturbance? An example of that is, let's say it's a yard tree and it's got a sidewalk coming all the way up to the base of the tree. It's got areas that's consistently being mowed nearby. I would call that soil disturbance. So some of this is a little bit subjective. You have to make a decision. Insect defoliation, there are all these things to look at. And again, any of these future trainings we do, whether it be Rick, myself, John, MSU, we'll talk more in depth about these categories so that you can look at your tree and make some good decisions. And also really important, insect holes, right? If you're looking for a longhorn beetle, for example, the size of that hole is going to be really important. Can you stick a pen or a pencil through it, or can't you? Because there are a lot of longhorn beetles out there that are not Asian longhorn beetle that will produce pretty intimidating looking holes, but they're actually not quite big enough to be ALB. So I don't know about John and Rick, but I get a lot of phone calls where people think they have Asian longhorn beetle on their maple trees, but you go out there, those exit holes aren't even close to being big enough. They're that still means the tree is weak. One of the other important components of this that you get to select, Paul,
Josh, would you use maple trees that have been used for tapping?
you can use any tree you want for this program. So the focal species are the maples, hemlock, and the black walnut. But there's an option when you register trees where you click whether it's one of the 3 focal invasives or one of the 3 focal trees that could get colonized by the invasives, or if it's some other tree. As an example, I have an elm tree in my yard that I registered. So I've already collected information on it, and I put that on there, and I'm just tracking it for health, because as it is right now, this is a perfectly healthy American elm tree, but it may not be in the future. Chestnut is another good example. George has chestnuts that don't have light, but and hopefully they never get it. But yeah, it doesn't have to be those focal ones, but those are the main ones that we're concerned about. Does that make sense? So back to the PowerPoint. So you've gone to Eyes on the Forest under citizen science. So once you've collected that information on that field data form, you come back into here, and now you're going to go to submit data. So that's the other option to click on, right next to print data field form, or field data form. And where it says Sentinel trees, if you haven't registered a tree before, right under that phrase, Sentinel trees, there's going to be a little button that says new. Okay, you just click new. That means you're registering a new tree. And once you register that new tree, it's going to give you the option to basically input the information that you already wrote down on that field data sheet on which you collected information ahead of time. So diameter, all these different things. Now let's say you were out this time of year and looked at a tree. Are you going to be able to assess like insect defoliation? Not really. That's fine. You can actually skip those sections and you can come back to it later and just modify it. And that's actually pretty important because you want to monitor these trees at different points in the year. And right now we don't have any symptoms that would show up on foliage during the spring or the summer. So you want to go back to that tree when it's actually leafed out and look for any symptoms that can only appear in the spring and summer months. But coordinates, my advice on that is actually just click on the map. That's how I do these things. I report on this all the time for invasive species. All I do is zoom in on that map and click a point. It autofills lat long. But you can mark your tree with the GPS if you want, and then transfer that lat long from your GPS to the coordinates on here. Either way it works. The idea with this is you take that information from that field data sheet, and now you're putting it into this database for that one tree that you registered. So the example here is a tree that was registered. And once you've registered the tree and you've entered information, it's now going to show up at the bottom for whatever you named it. Okay, you can name your tree, then you have to pick a species. Whatever name you give your tree, it can be whatever you want. Then you have to select a species. Once it shows up on the bottom part, so the bottom red arrow that you see, if you want to change information down there, you actually have to go into the Observations tab and then click New. This kind of throws people. It threw me at first too. You actually have to click on Observations and then click New. And that's how you modify stuff for that tree that's already been entered. So again, let's say you entered a tree in the winter and there's some things you just couldn't look for. You want to come back to that in the spring and summer. That's how you modify that tree. So you enter new information. Let's say you look at it again next year because you're like, wow, that tree is all of a sudden dying back for some reason. You're going to enter new information for that tree reflecting those observations. So again, there's step-by-step instructions on a sheet here. Up front, there's an example of that field data sheet. And then I think on the questionnaire, Vicki, there's going to be something indicating if you want further training, because we are going to do some further in-depth training in the future where we'll show you how to fill out that field data sheet and then also show you how to enter it on a computer in more of a workshop format. So with that, take questions. Carolyn?
Question, Josh. It seems like this would be really great for schools that have trees on their grounds. I know that Rick mentioned that you're looking for natural resources, people who have a background or interest in it. But could we work with a local school to enter that information?
Yeah,
and then-
to my knowledge, honestly, this is for anybody as long as they get the training. I mean, this is really meant to be, let's get as many people out there watching these trees as we can. Let's not restrict it just to foresters. Because now we're talking not very many people out there watching very many trees. As much woods as Rick and John and I see, it's good to get everybody involved as possible and just get everybody up to speed on what to look for. Because some of this stuff is really not that hard to look for. It just takes a little bit of being shown what to look for. Yeah, school trees would be great, especially because sometimes the trees in that setting are subjected to a little bit more stress than trees in the larger forests. So that could be like the first places where some of these infestations or some of these diseases come in, and then they're spreading from there. Because sometimes stress trees are more susceptible to some of these things.
When you talk about maple trees, are you talking about maple trees in general or specific like silver maple, red maple?
The longhorn beetle can affect all of them.
Any of them.
And also a lot of other hardwood trees, but they tend to colonize maples more so than the other hardwoods. But when John had the one slide up, there were a few other species or groups of species listed there that they can actually also infest. But especially further north, the concern with Asian longhorn beetle is that we have maple-dominated forests, and we have thousands and thousands of acres of it. So if ALB starts spreading in those areas, we lose a significant component of the forest. Just to come back to something somebody asked earlier, if you draw a triangle from Toronto in Ontario to Chicago to the Ohio area, it kind of cuts right through the middle part of Lower Peninsula of Michigan. So we've had confirmed detections of ALB on 3 different sides of us already. So this is really one to be watching for, and it's still spreading in Ohio, even though they're doing a good job of trying to get out and nip it in the bud. Other questions?
How long have they been working with the one in Cincinnati? How long ago did they discover it?
I don't know when that was first detected.
Pretty recently, last years.
I know we recently saw a presentation where they showed the map of how it's spreading. And they also showed a map of how many trees they were taking down to try to keep up with it, but it's a race at this point.
Kind of like the ashboard was, I'm sure.
Yeah, in a way, right? Similar.
Is it as mobile as that ash or?
I don't know how far the adults can fly, but it's spreading pretty rapidly. Yeah, I don't know, like, it may not fly as further as the EAD because it's a larger beetle, but I don't know for sure.
Is there a target number or minimum number of users that are they're heading for it that's wanted?
To get people registered, none that I know of, as many as possible.
Okay.
That would be, yeah, I don't know, it might be in the grant somewhere, which I don't have that information, but I know that we're trying to get this out as much as we can. And it's a huge part of the forestry assistance program now, so this is something we've been tasked to do, and I'm glad. I think it's a great program.
Landowners that want this space but don't really use the computer too well, what
If it's invasive species, I mean, you can always call me and I will report on this and for you. I have several landowners within the 5 counties of our SISMA that are not comfortable with reporting online. That's just not their thing, and they call me regularly. And I actually have one guy who keeps his own spreadsheet. He does the computer, but he's not comfortable reporting on this, and so he just gives me that information, and I can report it on this. And so feel free to contact me. I'll put some of my business cards out here too, so people have that contact information.
We actually, we haven't crossed that bridge yet, I guess. This is a little different because you have to track your own tree repetitively
Yeah.
over time. So there may be an option there for us to take some of that on, but I fear that if we open it up to that, there's going to be a lot of people saying, hey, keep track of my tree.
Right.
So I don't know. That's a good question. Because I deal with a lot of landowners who don't do good keeping track.
taken us off classes on how to keep your trees healthy so that they're protected from some of these invasive things. We've had 20 acres we bought 3 years ago, and a lot of it is wooded, and I want to keep it healthy. But I'm not sure exactly what we should be clearing out and what we should be doing to keep it healthy.
Well, that's more of a technical assistance type situation, which you would just contact me or John, depending on your call. We can actually work with you individually to answer those questions.
Okay.
The problem with a few of these invasive species is it can be the healthiest maple tree in the world, and Asian longhorn maple is still
That's
affected.
the,
Oak is the same way. There's no health gradient of how oak wilt affects oak. A healthy red oak and an unhealthy red oak, they both get nailed by oak wilt. And it's because of the exotic invasive nature of the organism that's attacking it. But healthy woods can help ward off some of the native forest health issues. And those are things that the forestry systems program foresters can help and educate.
Yeah, so we would encourage everybody to start with a site visit. Once we know what you have to work with and really what your uses and expectations are for the property, we can start to sort out some of the avenues for keeping it healthy and answer your question about what should be weeded out, so to speak, keep it healthy.
A good example is what do I do with my ash, right?
well, we were,
We get that question a lot.
Which we have a lot of that, that we're taking down, but we have hemlocks, we have maples and oaks, and I really, like to know how to take care of them so that they're not as susceptible to whatever comes along.
That's what we're here to do.
Yeah. Josh, can you talk about some of the successes they've had with eradicating the Asian longhorn beetle like in Illinois, so people realize this isn't just to slow the spread necessarily? Like, I've heard some people say, well, what's the point? We knew emerald ash borer was coming, it still killed all the ashes, but there has been success, so can you share some of that?
Yeah, I don't know all the details about what they did in Illinois, but supposedly it's completely under control. And a lot of it had to do with, just to be basic about it, I guess, they got on it as soon as they knew. EAB, by the time we discovered it in Detroit, it had been here, what, like 8-10 years maybe, they thought? So I had all that time to just sit around. And even in the last 15 to 20 years, the knowledge that just anybody out there has about the importance of invasive species, in my opinion, is skyrocketing. There's more awareness out there, whereas even 15, 20 years ago, if something invasive came, there's still a good population out there that thought, well, big deal, just let it do what it's going to do. It's going to be like a dandelion or a clover that I've got introduced and it's going to naturalize. But the problem is, like something Carolyn said earlier, is we're not very good at predicting which exotic species that come in are going to become invasive. And there are things that are invasive now that 50 years ago people would have laughed at you. You said, oh, that'll be invasive. Norway maple is a good example. Go to Mackinac Island, look at what Norway maple is doing. It's starting to do it on the mainland. Scots pine. We're getting better at making these predictions, but I think part of these success stories is getting on it right away.
The early detection is so important when it comes to a forest pest, because most of the time you are removing every tree of that species within a defined radius of that species. So the bigger that and longer that invasion is allowed to go, and we use emerald ash borer as an example. We were so far behind the game there that I don't think we ever threw the towel in. We still haven't threw the towel in. It's still a high priority in Michigan and throughout the United States. But that's why if we can find a single tree that's been attacked by one of these pests, and I hope we don't, but the sooner we find it, then of course we can control it in a much smaller defined area.
I think hemlock woolly adelgid is a good example. The fact that got found in Ottawa, the Muskegon counties, and the fact that everybody freaked out about it right away is not the same reaction people might have had 20 years ago. Did you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
As soon as that made the news, everybody was like, wow, we don't want that here, we don't want it spreading, but that might not have been the reaction even just a couple decades ago. So, Amy? Asian longhorn beetle. And actually, the adelgid worries me a little bit because you can transport that from campgrounds. Those little adelgids up. That, because it's so tiny, but yeah, I'd say the wood products, all that, Asian longhorn beetle are a concern. Cankers is tricky because we've got two organisms working together. Yeah, the firewood is, the same with oak wilt. Moving firewood around with oak wilt is a huge deal. And that's something that I know Rick and John and I are dealing with at the moment, getting proper cutting practices implemented and not moving an oak tree off-site right away if you think it might have been infected, because if it was, it's going to produce spores at some other site. Now we got a new infection, so yeah. Hopefully we learned a good lesson from Emerald Ash Borer and how firewood transportation will be better. Any other questions?
This is a little off subject, but the oak wilt, because the Manistee National Forest is so endowed with red oak. Just wondering if you know any percentage there of possibly infested or affected trees?
On the national forest, I don't. Where's Carolyn?
Just, the question just being that it would be hugely impactful in that area.
It is. One thing we're doing in this program is like Rick and John and I are working with private landowners to actually help prevent and slow the spread on those private properties so they don't get into large contiguous areas like national forests. An example is I confirmed oak wilt over on a road just north of US 10, and there was 3 landowners in just 2 acres, and they had oak wilt, and it was only maybe 100 feet from National Forest Service land, which would have been just in a sea of oak. This is Eastern Basin County. So they implemented treatment. They did the trenching. They did all the proper practices. So the hope is they've actually severed that oak wilt from being able to get into that national forest
I
system.
had read that was one of the ways that they address it, but when you look at a national forest full of oak trees, and this is red oak more, right, susceptible, then I've read about, trenches within those areas to try to slow it, but it doesn't seem feasible over a large area.
Actually, we've been treating some somewhat sizable infestations with trenching. The first spot that we found with oak wilt on the northern part of Manistee National Forest was in a campground. And so every year we go back and look at those trees and we keep trenching further and further out from those trees to make sure that it doesn't spread onto the private land or further into the national forest. So if we're talking just a few acres, we have been trenching a few acres at a time. But if it's 100 acres, that's not feasible, which is why this early detection system is so important.
We may have some in Elk Township out of Lake County. I've been watching those trees last couple of years. Some neighbors have been reporting wilting, other trees and dropping leaves at unusual times.
So if it's on private land, then it would be very important to talk to Josh or Rick or John for confirmation so that they can do a test to see if it is oak wilt or if it's oak decline. If it's on national forest, then please call either the Baldwin office or the Manistee office so we can send somebody out to look. Because the sooner we can